Please, you can't stay out here.
We'll be fine. Just go.
Here, take this card. They need to see a doctor.
There is a particular kind of grief that lives behind the eyes of a woman who has everything and still feels the hollow hum of what is missing. It does not announce itself. It does not weep in public or show up to dinner parties. It sits very quietly inside the chest and breathes, patient, persistent, present, in the spaces between all the beautiful things. Vivienne Carter-Holt had learned to move around it like furniture in a dark room. She knew where it was. She had memorized the shape of it. She simply did not look at it directly. She was 41, widowed 14 months ago, and on the surface of things, she was exactly the kind of woman that made other women uncomfortable at Gullis. Tall and brown-skinned, with the sort of cheekbones that photographers angled their cameras to catch, and in a quiet self-possession that read as coldness to people who confuse stillness with indifference. She ran Carter-Holt Capital, the private equity firm her late husband Dominic had founded, and she had quietly, methodically rebuilt from the inside out after his death. She wore her wealth the way she wore her clothing, well-fitted, never loud, chosen with the intention of making nothing easier for anyone trying to figure her out. People said she was untouchable. People said she had no soft places left. Both of these things were wrong, but Vivienne had long stopped correcting what people said about her. On the afternoon that everything changed, she had been to the hospital, not for herself. Her best friend since childhood, Camille, had just delivered a baby girl, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a head of curly black hair and fists already clenched like she intended to fight for something. Vivienne had sat beside the hospital bed, holding the baby for 20 minutes while Camille slept, exhausted, and she had felt the hollow hum grow louder. She and Dominic had tried for 8 years, 4 rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages. A specialist in Atlanta who had eventually gently told them that the probability of carrying a pregnancy to term was very low and that perhaps they should consider alternative paths. Dominic had squeezed her hand in that office and said it didn't matter, that he had her and she had him, and they were a whole world unto themselves. She had believed him. She had loved him fiercely and believed him. Then Dominic had died. Cardiac arrest, sudden, 44 years old, a Tuesday morning. And Vivienne had been left with the hollow hum and a company to run and a house that had too many rooms for one person. She handed the baby back to the sleeping Camille and left the hospital. Her driver, Terrell, was waiting with the car. A black Mercedes G-Wagon, not the ostentatious kind of black car, but the quiet, armored kind that didn't perform anything. He opened the rear door and Vivienne settled in, and the city folded around them as they moved. She was looking out the window, not at anything in particular, just the way you look when your eyes need somewhere to rest and your mind is too full for conversation. They were somewhere on the west side, traffic slow and thick, when she saw the woman. She was sitting on the sidewalk near a bus stop, small, dark-skinned, her hair undone and fraying, wearing what had been a gray dress before the streets had worked on it for a while. She was not holding a sign. She was not looking at the passing cars with the particular pleading gaze of someone asking for something. She was simply sitting with her back against a wall and 2 infants in her arms, and she was looking straight ahead at nothing. The babies were wrapped in a single blanket. One blanket, split between them, neither covered fully. Their faces were turned inward against the woman's chest. It was the posture that stopped Vivienne. Not the poverty, though the poverty was real and visible. It was the way the woman was sitting, the way her body had arranged itself around those 2 babies, even in exhaustion. The protective curve of her arms. The slight forward tilt of her shoulders, as if she were a wall, and the babies were what she was holding up. It was involuntary. It was the deep body memory of a mother who had run out of everything, except the instinct to cover her children. Vivienne had never had that instinct activated, but she recognized it. It was the thing the hollow hum was the absence of. "Terrell," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" "Pull over." He did not question it, which was one of the things she valued about Terrell. He pulled to the curb, and Vivienne was out of the car before he had fully stopped. The heat hit her immediately. It was August, midday, the kind of city heat that comes up from the concrete as well as down from the sky. She crossed the sidewalk quickly. Up close, the woman looked younger than she had from the car. Mid-20s, maybe. On her eyes were flat with the particular exhaustion that is beyond tiredness. The kind that has given up on sleep as a concept and simply endures. One of the babies made a sound, a thin, reedy sound that was trying to be a cry but didn't have enough energy for it, and the woman adjusted her arms without looking down. Muscle memory. Vivienne stopped a few feet away and crouched. "Hey," she said. The woman looked at her, wary. Practiced wariness, the kind that has learned that crouching strangers usually want something from you, even when they appear to be offering something. "I'm not going to bother you," Vivienne said. How old are they?" A pause, then, quietly, 7 months. "Are they eating?" The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I try." Vivienne looked at the babies. They had been beautiful once and were still beautiful in the way that all small children are, beneath the dirt, in the heat, in the thinness. She looked at their faces and felt the breath leave her body so slowly, she barely registered it happening. Their eyes, the eyes of the baby on the left, were open, looking up at the sky with the unfocused curiosity of very young children, and the color of those eyes. Amber. Light, warm amber, flecked with gold at the edges, in a shade that was so particular, so specific, that Vivienne had only ever seen it in one other pair of eyes in her entire life. Dominic's eyes. The hollow hum stopped. The silence it left was immense. "What's your name?" Vivienne asked, and her voice came out differently than she intended. Lower, more careful, with the voice of a woman who has just realized she is standing on something that might not hold her weight. "Deja," the woman said. "Deja Marshall." "Deja." Vivienne straightened slowly. Her knees were steady, but her mind was not. "I want to offer you and your babies a safe place for the night. Somewhere clean. Food. Medical care for them." She paused. "No strings. You can leave whenever you want. I can't leave them here in this heat." Deja looked at her for a long time. The practiced wariness measured the offer, turned it over, looked for the catch. "I don't need charity," Deja said. "I know," Vivienne said, "and I'm not offering it. I'm offering shelter for your children." She held the woman's gaze. "That's all." Something shifted in Deja's eyes. The wariness didn't disappear, but it moved aside. She got up. In the car, Vivienne did not speak. Terrell drove. The babies had been placed on the seat with towels arranged beneath them, and the cool air of the air conditioning seemed to confuse them pleasantly. Their thin, reedy sounds stopped, and they lay in the half-dazed comfort of a temperature that was, for the first time in a while, kind. Deja sat rigidly, her hands folded, her eyes on the back of Terrell's headrest. She was cataloging everything: the stitching on the seats, the small screen in the center console, the particular silence of expensive interiors. Vivienne watched her do it and recognized the calculation of a person taking inventory of a world they have never been inside. Vivienne's home was a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. 4 floors, a garden in the back, one walls full of art that Dominic had bought and she had never moved because moving it would have required deciding what to do with the spaces it left. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pearl, opened the door and managed her expression well at the sight of them. "Pearl," Vivienne said, "I need the guest suite on the 2nd floor prepared. And Dr. Lena's number. Call her and ask her to come tonight." "Yes, Mrs. Carter Holt." She led Deja inside. The woman stopped in the foyer and looked up at the ceiling, high with an old plaster medallion around the chandelier. And Vivienne saw the swallow move in her throat. "It's just a house," Vivienne said, not unkindly. "Is it yours?" "Yes." "Just yours? You live alone here?" The question arrived without malice. Vivienne answered it without flinching. "My husband passed away, so yes. He's just mine." Something crossed Deja's face, a complicated flicker that Vivienne, in the moment, read as sympathy. She would later understand it had been something else entirely. Dr. Lena Osei arrived within 2 hours. She was thorough and gentle and efficient. And when she had finished examining the babies, twin boys, she confirmed, malnourished but stable, no signs of anything that rest and nutrition couldn't address, she took Vivienne aside in the hallway. "They need consistent feeding, warmth, and monitoring for the next few days," she said. They're resilient, but they've been surviving rather than living. She paused. Vivienne, are you okay? You look like you've seen something. I'm fine, Vivienne said. Thank you for coming. After Lena left, Vivienne stood outside the guest room door for a moment. From inside came the sound of Deja moving around, of the baby settling into something like comfort. Small sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of a household that was suddenly not just one person. She went to her own bedroom. She sat at the edge of the bed. She opened the drawer of her nightstand and took out a photograph that she kept there because she couldn't decide whether to display it or put it away. Dominic at the beach in South Carolina 2 summers ago, laughing at something off camera. His face open, his eyes, those amber eyes, light and warm and gold-flecked, catching the late afternoon light. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up the private investigator's number she had used 3 years ago when there had been a corporate espionage issue at the firm. She stared at the number. She did not dial it. Not yet. But she thought, I need to know. I need to know, and I need to know carefully, and I need to know before I feel one more thing about those babies. She closed the laptop. She turned off the lamp. She lay down on the bed in the dark with her shoes still on and stared at the ceiling of a house that had, in a single afternoon, changed its shape around her. By the next morning, she had made 3 decisions. The first was to call Dr. Lena and have her collect a DNA sample from the babies under the guise of a follow-up exam. She had a sample of Dominic's DNA on file. It had been taken during one of the fertility consultations, and she had kept a copy, for reasons she had never been able to articulate cleanly, in a lockbox in her home office. And the second was to say nothing to Deja until she knew. The third was to be kind in the meantime. Not because kindness was easy. It wasn't, not with the amber eyes sitting in her guest room, but because Deja Marshall and her sons had done nothing to her. Whatever the truth turned out to be, it was not Deja's fault, and it was absolutely not those babies' fault. She brought breakfast to the guest room herself, knocked, waited. Deja opened the door holding one baby. The other was asleep on the bed behind her, tucked against a pillow. She looked at the tray Vivienne was carrying, and then at Vivienne. You cooked? She said. Pearl cooked. I carried it. Vivienne held the tray out. May I come in? A beat. Then Deja stepped back. Vivienne set the tray on the small table by the window. She sat in the chair across from it, where Deja sat on the edge of the bed with the baby and began eating. Carefully, the way someone eats when they're trying not to reveal how hungry they are. What are their names? Vivienne asked. Deja looked at the sleeping baby. Marcus. That one's Miles. Marcus and Miles. Vivienne kept her face neutral. Those are good names. I wanted names that sounded like they could be somebody. Deja said it simply, without self-pity. Just a fact. Vivienne looked at her. Really looked. The face behind the exhaustion was younger than the eyes. There was a quality to Deja Marshall that was, despite everything, not broken. Bent heavily, but not broken. She had the posture of someone who had survived things by deciding that surviving was a sufficient form of defiance. Where are you from originally? Vivienne asked. Baltimore. A pause. I came to New York 3 years ago. For a man. She said it without expression. That worked out about as well as those things usually do. Vivienne said nothing. She let the silence hold the rest of what wasn't being said. You don't ask a lot of questions, Deja said after a moment. I'm asking some. Most people would have asked more by now. Most people are more interested in their own theories than in the actual answers, Vivienne said. Deja looked at her with something that was not quite a smile. That's true. The baby on the bed, Marcus or Miles, Vivienne had already lost track, stirred and opened his eyes. Those amber eyes unfocused, searching the ceiling. Vivienne looked away. The DNA results came back on a Thursday, 4 days after she had asked Lena to collect the samples. Vivienne was in her home office when the email arrived. She had been in back-to-back calls all morning about a portfolio company that was struggling and required a decision she didn't want to make. And she had been managing the familiar exhaustion of being the person in every room who was expected to have the answer. She saw the email subject line, confidential, results as requested, and her hands went still on the keyboard. She finished the call she was on. She poured a glass of water from the pitcher on her desk. She sat down. She opened the email. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The words were very clear. The page was very simple. There was no ambiguity in the numbers, and no gentleness in the way probability statistics were formatted. She read the line 3 times, not because she needed to read it 3 times to understand it, but because her mind kept presenting her with the sentence, and she kept confirming it was real. Dominic's sons. She set the glass down carefully because her hands were not entirely steady, and she did not want to spill water on the desk that had been his. Then she stood and walked to the window and looked at the garden below. The roses she had kept alive through 2 winters, the iron bench where she had sat the night after his funeral because she could not stand being inside. And she breathed. She did not cry. This was not because she was too strong to cry or too cold to feel it. It was because the grief that arrived in that moment was a different shape than grief had been before. She had already mourned Dominic. She had already been through the tunnel of his death and come out the other side into the flat, practical terrain of a life she was rebuilding one decision at a time. What arrived now was something older and stranger, the retroactive grief of a marriage she had believed in completely, now revealed to have had rooms she had never been allowed into. He had told her it was both of them, that neither of them could carry it through. He had held her hand through every appointment and every injections and every disappointment, and he had said, steadily and with those amber eyes looking directly into hers, "We are in this together," all while there were children, somewhere in this city, growing. She stood at the window for a long time. She did not go to find Deja immediately. She sat with the email for another 20 minutes. A third reading, a fourth. Not because the meaning changed, but because she needed the repetition to finish arriving at the fact of it. She thought about the IVF consultations, the sterile rooms, the particular fluorescent light of medical waiting areas, the way Dominic had held her hand through each appointment with the steady practiced calm of a man who knew exactly how to comfort someone and deployed it deliberately. She thought about the night of the second miscarriage when she had sat on the bathroom floor and he had sat beside her on the cold tile and said nothing, just pressed his shoulder against hers in the dark, and she had thought, this is what love looks like when it is real. She had thought that. She folded the laptop closed. The roses outside the window were full. Everything in August was full. She thought about Dominic the way you think about someone when you are revising who they were. Not erasing. She was not going to erase the real things, the good things, the years of a man who had genuinely loved her in the ways he was capable of. But revising, adding back the rooms she had not known existed, walking through the architecture of the marriage with new information and seeing how the spaces connected. He had been afraid of the confrontation. She understood this with the particular clarity of a woman who had been married to a man for 11 years and knew how he moved away from difficult things. Not by lying exactly, but by managing information, controlling the frame, keeping his different worlds from touching. She had thought this quality of his was contained to business. She had thought the instinct to manage information stopped at the front door of their home. She had been wrong, but she was not wrong about the love. Both could be true. She was old enough and had read enough and had lived enough to know that people could be faithful in every dimension but one and still love you in most of the ways that mattered. That did not make this easier. It made it more complicated, which was harder. She looked at the DNA result one more time. Then she went to find Deja. She found her in the garden sitting on the iron bench with both babies on a blanket at her feet. The afternoon light was soft, and Deja had her face tilted slightly toward it. Just slightly, the way people do when they are absorbing something they don't get enough of. She had washed her hair. It was in 2 braids now. And without the exhaustion and the street grime and the fear, she looked closer to her actual age, which Vivienne was beginning to think was no more than 25. Vivienne sat beside her. She did not say anything immediately. They sat in the garden quiet for a moment. The distant sound of the city, the babies making their small, contented sounds on the blanket, the roses doing what roses did in August. Then Vivienne said, "Deja, I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is not an accusation. Deja turned to look at her. The wariness returned, quick, like a reflex. The man you came to New York for, Vivienne said. The father of your boys? What was his name? A long pause, Deja's hands, which had been loose in her lap, tightened slightly. Why? Because I think I know who he was. Silence, then. Dominic, Deja said quietly. His name was Dominic. The name moved through the air between them like smoke. Vivienne nodded once. Dominic Carter Holt was my husband, she said. He died 14 months ago. And the boys, I had them tested. Marcus and Miles are his sons. Deja went completely still. The babies played on the blanket, unaware. A bee moved through the roses. I didn't know he was married, Deja said, and her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. I want to be clear about that. I didn't know, not at first. He told me he was separated. He told me the divorce was being finalized. He bought that line of... She stopped, swallowed. He was convincing. He was very convincing. I know, Vivienne said, and she did. She understood, precisely and without any effort, how Dominic had been convincing. How he had been the kind of man who made you feel like the most important thing in whatever room he was in, and how that quality, the quality she had fallen in love with, could be weaponized in ways she had not wanted to see. When did you find out he was married? Deja looked down at her hands. When I was pregnant, 4 months in. He stopped returning my calls. I went to the address I had for him, and a neighbor, not knowing who I was, just mentioned his wife. Vivienne. She described you. Her jaw tightened. Light-skinned lady. Always put together. He talks about her all the time. She paused. I was sick when I found out. I mean physically sick. I threw up in the street outside his building. Vivienne was quiet. I wrote him letters, Deja continued. In actual letters, I didn't know what else to do. I sent them to his office. He never replied. Then someone told me he died and I just... She stopped again. Her voice had gone thin. I didn't know what to do with any of it. I'd already lost the apartment when I lost my job. And then the boys came early, and they were small, and I was alone, and I just... She stopped. The bee moved out of the roses and disappeared. I am so sorry, Deja said, turning to look at Vivienne, with eyes that were bright and direct and sorry in the complicated, layered way of someone who is sorry for many things at once. I know that doesn't fix it, but I need you to know I am sorry. Vivienne looked at her for a long time. He's the one who owed apologies, she said finally. Not you. It was a simple sentence. Vivienne said it simply. But it landed on Deja Marshall's face the way a hand lands on a shoulder. Unexpected, warm, and steadying. Deja looked away quickly, but Vivienne saw her eyes close briefly against whatever was building behind them. What I want to know, Vivienne said, is what you want, not what you expected to happen, not what you're afraid to ask for, what you actually want, for yourself and for your boys. Deja was quiet for a long moment. I want to not be surviving anymore, she said at last. It came out small and exact, the way true things sometimes do. I'm so tired of just surviving. I want my boys to go to school. I want them to have their own beds and not share a blanket. I want to finish my degree. I started a business degree before everything fell apart. She paused. I want to stop being afraid of what tomorrow looks like. Vivienne nodded. She did not say anything immediately. She let the wanting be spoken into the air of the garden without rushing to resolve it. Then she said, I'd like to make a proposal. Stay here. Finish your degree. Let the boys be cared for properly while you do. I'll retain a family attorney to establish their inheritance rights. Dominic's estate has not been fully settled, and they are entitled to their share as his sons. She held Deja's gaze steadily. I want to be clear. This is not charity. These boys are Dominic's children, which makes this a debt his estate owes them, and you are their mother, which means your stability is their stability. Deja stared at her. Why would you do this? Because they are innocent, Vivienne said. Soranen, because you are. She looked at Marcus and Miles on the blanket. Marcus chewing on his own fist. Miles watching the sky with those amber eyes. And because I have lived in a house built for more people than are in it, and I am tired of being the only one here. The last part came out slightly differently than she intended, more honest than she had planned. Deja heard it. You're lonely, she said, not as an accusation, as a recognition. I've been lonely for a very long time, Vivienne said, longer than I knew. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not the kind of montage that movies make of things. Soft lighting and matching coffee cups and growing understanding set to music. They were real, which meant they were uneven. There were mornings Vivienne walked into the kitchen and saw Deja there with the babies and felt a cold wave of something she had to consciously choose not to act on. There were nights she sat in Dominic's old study and turned over the evidence of his deception, the timeline, the absences she had explained to herself in a dozen reasonable ways, and felt the retroactive unraveling of things she had believed were solid. She did not direct this at Deja. She was careful about this, deliberate and careful, because Deja was not her grief and Deja was not her anger. Deja was a 24-year-old woman who had been used by the same man and left to survive what his choices had done to her. And she had survived it, and she was here. The boys grew, small and incremental, with the way infants grow when they have enough food and warmth, rounding out, becoming more solid, filling up the spaces of their own bodies. Marcus was demonstrative. He reached for things, grabbed your finger if you offered it, made sounds that were trying to become communication. Miles was watchful. He would fix those amber eyes on your face and just look, considering, as if he were reading something and taking his time. Vivienne started reading to them. She did not plan to. It happened one evening when Mrs. Pearl had gone home and Deja was at her first night class, and Vivienne had put the boys down in the crib and was about to leave, and Marcus made the sound that was trying to become a word, and she sat back down. She read from a collection of poetry that was on the shelf nearest the chair. It had been hers from college. She read to them for 40 minutes while they lay in the crib, looking at her with the solemn, courteous attention of children who have not yet learned to pretend interest they don't feel. When Deja came home, she stood in the doorway of the nursery for a moment watching Vivienne read. She didn't say anything, but the next morning she looked at Vivienne differently. The trouble arrived, as trouble always does in the lives of people with money, in the form of family. Dominic's brother, Reginald Carter, arrived at the brownstone on a Saturday morning in a silver Range Rover with two of his business associates in tow, and the particular energy of a man who has recently been informed of something that threatens his financial interests. He was 3 years older than Dominic had been, built like him but thicker, and with none of Dominic's warmth and all of his confidence. Vivienne met him in the foyer. "Reggie," she said. "Vivienne." He looked past her as if he expected to see something. "Is it true? Are they actually here? Children in your house?" "Come in," she said. "Sit down." He came in. He sat down. His associates hovered near the door in the way that men brought to intimidate situations tend to hover. "I heard from the estate attorney," Reginald said. "You filed a claim on behalf of 2 children, on behalf of some girl you found on the street." "On behalf of Dominic's sons," Vivienne said, "whose paternity has been confirmed by DNA testing." The associates exchanged a glance. Reginald's jaw moved. "That's a very serious accusation against Dominic's character," he said. "The DNA test is a fact, not an accusation. You're going to take the word of some random woman who claims Dominic is the father of her." "I'm not taking anyone's word," Vivienne said. "The science speaks for itself. I don't need a second-hand account when I have a 99.97% match to a sample I collected personally." She folded her hands. "What I'm hearing, Reggie, is that you are less concerned about those boys' welfare than you are about what their existence means for the estate distribution." The room was quiet. "That's not," he started. "You were expecting, after the settlement period, to receive a significant portion of the estate." She said it levelly. "I know this because I know what Dominic's original will said before I began the amendment process. And I know what the family expects. What you did not factor in is that those boys exist. And as Dominic's legal heirs, they change the math considerably." Reginald leaned forward. "Vivienne, be reasonable. You don't owe that woman anything. You don't owe her children anything. Your grief is making you— My grief, Vivienne said, is the most organized it's been in over a year. I am not confused, Reginald. I am not emotional. I am making clear-eyed decisions about the obligations this estate has to two children your brother brought into the world and chose not to acknowledge. She stood. I think we're done for today. My attorney will be in touch. He left. He did not leave gracefully, but he left. Vivienne stood in the foyer after the door closed and pressed two fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed. From the top of the stairs, Deja's voice came down quietly. Iker, how much trouble are they going to be? Vivienne looked up. Deja was standing at the top landing, holding Miles, who was watching the staircase with his amber eyes. Manageable, Vivienne said. Don't worry about Reginald. He's going to try to challenge the claim. He can try. The DNA is airtight, and I have the best estate attorney in the state. Vivienne put her hand on the banister. You are not going to be on the street again, Deja. I need you to understand that as a settled fact. Deja looked at her for a moment. Miles reached one small hand toward the air in front of him, grasping at nothing in particular. Why do you keep protecting us? Deja asked. It was not suspicious. It was a real question, asked by a person who had learned not to trust protection without understanding where it came from. Vivienne thought about it honestly. Because someone should have before now, she said, and because your boys have his eyes, and I spent a long time loving those eyes. Even if the man behind them was not always who I thought. She paused. And because you told me you wanted to stop surviving. I know what that feels like. I've been surviving too. Deja nodded, slowly in the way of someone receiving information they will need to hold carefully. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she had said it simply, without the defensive padding of someone who expects gratitude to cost them something. Vivienne nodded. She went back to her office. She had a battle with Reginald's attorneys to prepare for, and she was, for the first time in a very long time, looking forward to a fight she knew she would win. The plan came to Vivienne on the morning she fainted. It was not a dramatic faint. She had been in her home office, on a call with her attorney about the estate challenge, and she had stood up too quickly and the room had tilted, and she had sat back down on the floor in an undignified heap, her phone still against her ear, and the attorney's voice somewhere above her saying, Vivienne? Vivienne, are you still there? She told him she'd call him back. She sat on the floor for a moment and understood that she had been running on less sleep and less food than she was accounting for, that the strain of the past weeks had been accumulating in her body the way strain does when you are too busy managing it consciously to notice what it is doing below the surface. She had been this way after Dominic died, maintaining function, so a maintaining structure. Telling everyone around her she was fine until the body eventually filed a formal complaint. What she had not anticipated was that it would be Deja who found her. The door to the home office had been ajar, and Deja passed it on her way upstairs with a laundry basket and saw Vivienne sitting on the floor with her legs straight in front of her and her back against the desk and stopped immediately. Vivienne, I'm fine. You're on the floor. I sat down deliberately. From a standing position in the middle of a phone call? Deja set down the basket and came into the office. She crouched in front of Vivienne with the same matter-of-fact efficiency Vivienne had watched her use with the boys. No fuss, no drama, just direct assessment. She put the back of her hand against Vivienne's forehead. You're clammy. Have you eaten today? Vivienne thought about it. I had coffee. That's not food. Deja stood. Come to the kitchen. I have calls. You can make calls sitting at the kitchen table just as well as you can make them sitting on the floor of your office. She held out her hand. Vivienne looked at the hand for a moment. Then she took it and let herself be helped up. In the kitchen, Deja made eggs. Not elaborate eggs, just scrambled eggs. Quick, competent, the kind of cooking that is really just feeding, which is its own form of care. She set them in front of Vivienne with toast and a glass of orange juice and sat down across from her. Eat, she said. Vivienne ate. The eggs were good, uncomplicated and good. You do this, Deja said after a moment, not accusatorially, just observationally. On you take care of every situation except the ones that are about you. I've been here almost 6 weeks, and I've watched you manage everything and take care of me and take care of the boys and fight your brother-in-law's lawyers, and I've never once seen you let anyone take care of you." Vivienne looked at her. "You sound like my therapist." "Do you actually go to your therapist?" A pause. "I did. Before Dominic died. I've rescheduled 3 times since." Deja shook her head in a way that was almost fond. "Call her today." "You're giving me instructions in my own house." "Yes," Deja said simply. Something in Vivienne's chest eased. She had not noticed how tightly she had been holding it until it loosened. "Okay," she said. "I'll call." It was Pearl who brought it to Vivienne's attention. We're 3 days later, delivered with Pearl's characteristic directness and the air of someone who felt she was performing a civic duty. "Mrs. Carter Holt," she said, appearing at the door of the study, "I want to say something, and I want you to hear me out before you respond." Vivienne looked up. "That opening has historically preceded things I don't want to hear." "Yes," Pearl said. "I know. That's why I'm saying it." She came in and stood with her hands folded. "It's about Deja." The information Pearl had pieced together was uncomfortable and careful, and largely sourced from Deja's own phone conversations, overheard in the way that things are overheard in a house where one person moves quietly and another forgets to close doors. Vivienne listened. She did not interrupt. When Pearl finished, Vivienne sat very still. "You're certain," she said. "I'm certain of what I heard." "All right," Vivienne said. "Thank you, Pearl. Please don't say anything to her." Pearl nodded and left. Vivienne sat alone. The information Pearl had given her was not the kind of information that rearranged everything. It was the kind that provided context for things that had felt slightly off without her being able to name what was wrong. Small things. A phone call Deja had taken in the garden, walking to the far end away from the windows. The way Deja had, early on, seemed to already know the general layout of the brownstone. Not dramatically, just the casual knowledge of someone who had been given a description. The fact that the street corner where Vivienne had found her was, if you looked at a map, not particularly far from the brownstone. None of these things, Tuna alone, meant anything. Together with what Pearl had heard, they formed a different picture. Vivienne thought about it for a long time. She was not angry in the hot, immediate way. She was something colder and more considered. She had been here before. Not here exactly, but in the territory of discovering that someone she had trusted had been operating with information she didn't have. Dominic had taught her what that felt like. She was not going to perform ignorance a second time. She called her attorney. She also called Marcus, her private investigator. A different Marcus, a careful and discreet one who had been useful during the corporate espionage situation. And then she waited, because she had learned that waiting when you have the information is considerably more useful than acting before you have all of it. And the full picture arrived within 72 hours. Deja Marshall had been contacted, not by Reginald directly, but through an intermediary. Approximately 4 days before Vivienne had found her on that street corner. The intermediary had told her where Vivienne's route home typically passed, had suggested that the sight of a young mother in distress with very small children might move a woman known for her quiet philanthropy. Deja had been paid, not a large amount, enough to go along with a plan she had been told was simple. Get inside the house, establish trust, and report back on Vivienne's intentions regarding the estate. What she had not been told was that she would be inside the house for 6 weeks. What she had not been told was what Vivienne was actually like. And what she had not been told, because Reginald's intermediary had not thought it mattered, was that the twins' DNA would be tested and confirmed, and that Vivienne, far from being the cold and calculating adversary Reginald had described, would be kind, genuinely kind, without an angle. Deja had been calling Reginald's intermediary less and less in the past 3 weeks. Her reports had become vague. The intermediary had called her twice in the last 10 days, pressing for useful information about Vivienne's legal strategy, and she had given them nothing. Vivienne sat with all of this. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult decisions in business. Not rushing, not catastrophizing, just holding the full weight of it and asking herself what she actually wanted to do. What she did not want to do was make this into a performance of betrayal and retribution. She had watched enough people perform those scenes to know they mostly benefited the people watching rather than the people living them. What she did want was the truth, spoken plainly, in a room with both of them in it. She asked Deja to come to the living room that evening after the boys were down. Deja came in wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, her braids slightly frayed at the ends, looking like a person who had finally started to relax. She sat on the couch and pulled her feet up underneath her and looked at Vivienne with the open expression she had been wearing more often lately. Vivienne sat across from her. She set a single sheet of paper on the coffee table between them. It was a summary her investigator had compiled. One page, sort the essential facts only, nothing embellished. Deja looked at the paper. Her face did not do the things that guilty faces in stories do. It did not crumple or turn red or look for exits. It went very still. The stillness of a person who has been bracing for something and has finally stopped bracing. She looked up at Vivienne. "How long have you known?" she asked. 3 days. Deja nodded. She looked at the paper again. Then she looked at the window. "I'm going to tell you the truth," she said. "Not because you're holding the paper, because you deserve it, and I'm tired of carrying things." She exhaled. "A man came to me at the shelter where I was staying. Said he knew who the boy's father was, that the father's wife was rich and was contesting the estate, and there was a way for me to get what my sons were owed. And he gave me $500 and told me where to be." She paused. "I thought I was just going to get inside, see what was happening, make sure you weren't going to fight against the boy's claim. I didn't know you." She stopped. "And then you did know me," Vivienne said. "And then I did know you." Deja looked at her directly. "And it's not what I expected. Any of it." She shook her head. "I stopped reporting to them after the second week. I told them I wasn't finding anything useful, which was true because there was nothing to find. You've never once been anything other than exactly who you present yourself as, and I genuinely did not know how to report that to people who were convinced you were a threat." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "But did you ever actually intend to undermine my legal position?" "No," the word came out fast and sure. "Not after the first conversation with you, and honestly, not really before it either. What they told me was that you were trying to cut the boys out of what was theirs, that you were going to use the estate settlement to make sure Dominic's children from another woman got nothing." She shook her head. "That's not what I found." "It's not what you found," Vivienne agreed, "because it's not what was happening." Silence. "I'm sorry," Deja said. "I know that word has a limited radius after what I've told you, but I mean it." Vivienne looked at her for a long time. She thought about Reginald, who had used a 24-year-old woman and her infants as a chess piece without a moment of consideration for what that cost her. She thought about Dominic, who had done something similar in a different arena. She thought about the ways in which men like that moved through the world using other people as instruments and then declared themselves innocent when the instruments had feelings. She thought about those amber eyes. "I'm not going to ask you to leave," Vivienne said. Deja looked up sharply. "But I need one thing from you," Vivienne continued. "I need the name of the intermediary, and I need you to be willing to provide a deposition about how Reginald Carter orchestrated this, if it comes to that." Deja's jaw set. "You want to take him down?" "I want to ensure that my stepsons—" She paused and the word hung in the air, not just for Deja, but for herself. It was the first time she had used it. She let it stay. "I want to ensure that Marcus and Miles are protected, legally, permanently, and the only way to do that is to neutralize the threat their uncle represents." She paused. "Will you help me?" Deja looked at her for a long moment. "You just called them your stepsons," she said. "I did. Do you mean that?" Vivienne thought of Marcus reaching for her finger in the crib on the first night, that instinctive small grip, that wordless claiming of whatever warmth was available. She thought of Miles watching her read poetry with those amber eyes, watching with such solemnity that she had started choosing poems she actually wanted to discuss, just in case he was following more than she assumed. She thought of the morning she had sat on the kitchen floor at 6 a.m. because Miles had woken early and she had heard him through the monitor and been in his room before she had consciously decided to go. And she had sat on the floor beside the crib, and he had looked at her through the slats with those eyes, and she had said quietly into the early morning quiet, "I see you. I'm here." She had not told anyone that had happened. She was telling herself now. Yes, she said. I mean it. Deja nodded. Then I'll give you everything. Reginald Carter did not go quietly. This surprised no one who knew him. His attorneys filed counters and objections and a motion challenging the DNA testing methodology that was technically creative, but legally without merit. The deposition process was unpleasant. For there were 3 weeks during which Vivienne's name appeared in a business press item that framed the estate dispute in a way designed to embarrass her, and she weathered it the way she weathered all storms. Publicly calm, privately methodical, always 3 moves ahead. The settlement came on a Wednesday afternoon. Her attorney called to confirm it, and she was in the middle of feeding Miles when the call came. Not Pearl, not the nanny they had arranged, but Vivienne, sitting on the kitchen floor with Miles in her lap and a spoon in her hand. And she answered the phone one-handed. We have it, the attorney said. Full guardianship confirmed. Their inheritance rights are protected and documented, and Reginald Carter has agreed, as a condition of avoiding further proceedings, to have no further contact with the boys or their mother without consent. Good, Vivienne said. Miles looked up at her with his amber eyes, completely uninterested in the legal victory he had just won. Good, she said again, to him. On an October afternoon, nearly a year after the day Vivienne had crouched on a hot sidewalk and asked a stranger how old her babies were, she drove the same route home. Terrell was driving as he always did. The light fell differently in October, lower and more golden, turning the city a different color than it was in August. She looked out the window as they passed the corner. The bus stop, the wall Deja had been sitting against. Same route, same spot, Terrell said. He had not said anything when she had directed him this way. He just drove. Same spot, she said. She looked at the corner for a moment as they idled at the light. Empty now. Just a bus stop, a wall, a sidewalk, the city moving around it indifferently. Then the light changed and they moved on. At home, the sounds were different than they used to be. Miles and Marcus were 1 year old and mobile and opinionated about both of these facts in ways that had modified the acoustics of the brownstone considerably. The halls that had been silent now had small running footsteps in them. The rooms that had been museum quiet now had the residue of toys and the sound of Deja's voice, narrating things to the boys the way she had started to do. A running commentary on the world, which she said was how children learned that the world had names for things. Vivienne walked in and put down her bag and heard the sounds. She stood in the foyer for a moment, just standing in the sound of the house. Mrs. Pearl came through from the kitchen. Deja's in the study, she said. She wanted to use the big desk for her thesis paper. Pearl said this with the barely contained satisfaction of someone who has watched a situation develop in a direction they approve of. How are the boys? Fed, bathed, causing trouble in the garden. Pearl allowed herself a small smile. Marcus stole Miles's toy 3 times and Miles looked at him like he was deciding how to respond strategically. That baby's going to be dangerous when he's 20. Vivienne laughed. It came out easily, the way laughing has to come from a place that is not bracing against anything. She went through to the garden. The boys were on the grass in the last of the afternoon light. Marcus still the demonstrative one. Miles still the watchful one. Both of them solid and well, and entirely at home in the life they had been given the chance to grow into. Miles looked up when she came out, the way he always did, that direct, considering look, the amber eyes finding her face and staying there. She sat down on the grass beside them. Marcus immediately climbed onto her lap. Miles looked at her for another moment, and then, with the deliberateness of a child who does not do things without having decided to do them, crawled over and sat on the grass right beside her and leaned the warm weight of his head against her arm. She sat in the garden in the October light with Dominic's sons against her, and she felt the hollow hum, the things she had moved around like furniture in a dark room for years, in the things she had learned the shape of and the location of and never directly looked at. She felt it go quiet, not because it had been answered in the way she had once expected an answer to look, not by the things she had planned for and grieved the losing of, but by something that had come sideways out of a Tuesday afternoon in a hot sidewalk and 2 small bodies wrapped in a single blanket, and a young woman whose wariness turned to trust slowly and then completely. From inside the house came Deja's voice calling out, "Vivienne, do you know where the blue folder is? The one with the estate documents?" "Second shelf in the study," Vivienne called back. "Left side." A pause, then, "Thank you." The boys stayed where they were. The light stayed where it was. The garden smelled of October and roses and the end of a very long day that had been worth having. Vivienne stayed on the grass. She was not surviving, she was not managing. She was not maintaining structure while the grief lived quietly in her chest. She was simply here, present, in her own life, which had turned out, after everything, despite everything, to be large enough to hold more than she had been told it could. There would be more things to navigate. There always were. Reginald would not stay gone forever. People with resentments and a sense of entitlement rarely did. The boys would grow older, and eventually there would be questions to answer about their father, about the truth of where they came from, about the complicated architecture of the family they had been born into. And Deja would finish her degree and find her footing and make her own decisions about what her life became. And some of those decisions would take her in directions Vivienne couldn't predict and couldn't control. The house would have to keep adapting. They would all have to keep adapting. Vivienne knew this and did not feel troubled by it. She had spent a long time believing that the right kind of life was the kind you could maintain, the kind you could keep steady and ordered and moving in a direction you controlled. She had been very good at that kind of life. She had also been, in it, alone in ways she had not let herself fully measure. This life, the one with running footsteps in the hallways and a thesis paper on the desk in the study, and two small boys in the garden who had come to her the way real things often come, sideways and uninvited and utterly necessary, this life was harder to maintain. It was also real in a way the other had not entirely been. Miles leaned his head harder against her arm. His hair was soft and smelled of the lavender soap Pearl used for the boy's bath. Vivienne put her cheek against the top of his head. That, she thought, was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything.